The Void, Series 1, Episode 3. Trust in the Enemy, by Richard Marcus Powell. Chapter 2. The destination alarm sounded as soon as the subspace Phoenix arrived in the targeted system. Skenn stirred from his slumber, coming to consciousness slowly. The pain in his head had subsided a bit, but it was still there. He grabbed a few more painkillers and swallowed them with the remains of the water left from his last period of consciousness. Stumbling, he made his way into the cockpit and started to evaluate his position. The computer was still winding down from the jump, clearing masses of calculations from its memory as it readied itself for new challenges. There was another ship nearby, something which prodded at Skenn's paranoia. It was a freighter leaving the system. Unlikely to be a threat. That said, his paranoia remained until the ship jumped out. The system Targon was located in was relatively unremarkable. 6 planets around a red dwarf, with only Tagen being populated. The system itself was situated further away from the Jujunkai border and closer to the Republic border, still on the edge of Teel space. Once Tagen had been a busy planet, being on the route between Teel Corporation space and the Teel Corporation space. The corporations had forever been enemies, but the routes between them had always been maintained. This was less about trade and more about strategic positioning. Even between bitter rivals, there had been some necessary trade, and Targon did well from that. However, its fortunes had taken a dive with the advent of the Republic, and the mutual trade shriveled to little more than the black market. A planet that once paid host to around 10 million was now home to less than half that number. The slide to Targon began, the ship jolting slightly as it was wrenched out of time-space and sent hurling towards the planet at unrealistic speed. Skenn took a brief moment to activate the coffee machine from his console, hoping the percolations would be complete by the time he landed. The subspace Phoenix jutted out of the slide and into a far orbit of the planet. Skenn contacted flight control and requested landing permission. There was the usual rigmarole of explaining his identification, purpose, and contents. He couldn't use any of his official aliases, so he resorted to a backup identification he picked up from an expert forger. Target may be a forgotten outpost on the edge of the Empire, but it still had a militia presence, so he had to be careful. Even with a fake identity, he would have to land and pass through migration control. This would be manned by local police, with perhaps a few militia on standby. Security was more stringent than on Musself, but nowhere near as tight as the inner core of the corporate empire. As predicted, flight control granted him permission to land as an unscheduled arrival. This wouldn't raise any suspicions in itself. Unscheduled traffic was commonplace, as it was in all occupied systems. With the subspace Phoenix disguised as a small trader craft, it all appeared as mundane as it was meant to. The ship approached the planet with measured pace, Skenn assessing the planet itself. It was a large terrestrial planet in the midst of being terraformed. The process had been started a few hundred years previous, but its loss of importance had led to its stalling. It was a cold and windswept planet, with some vegetation and a partial atmosphere. It was possible to walk around without an environmental suit, but he would have to use a regulator configured for this type of atmosphere. He didn't like regulators, but it was only for the fact that it was an additional weak spot in a fight. A sharp blow on the throat could break it, causing either choking on the object itself or from an unregulated atmosphere flowing into the lungs. The former was unlikely, but possible. The latter, almost a certainty. Targon had a rocky, mountainous landscape, and he could see ice in the distance. Not the most clement of environments, but a lot more welcoming than Musself. The ship descended towards the only city on the planet, imaginatively named Targon City. It was the only real population center. Some people would make their home away from it, but this was where the majority of people would be. Touching down, he readied himself. He selected a gun that wouldn't look out of place. Traders were often armed, and guns were common enough in colonies, so it wouldn't spark any specific suspicions. Some of the guns he owned would, simply for being obvious military hardware. Likewise, his knife was out for the same reason. He also ensured the ship's sensor bafflers were enabled. If they were to decide to scan his ship, the computer would detect the scan and hack into the scanner to deliver a fake reading. All very sophisticated technology, and not cheap. but Skenn had always preferred to spend extra for a more reliable product. It was a shame he couldn't carry such technology on his person. It was easily undone as soon as a physical search was undertaken. The landing protocol denoted no airlock procedures, so he activated the passenger ramp and exited the ship, ensuring he closed the ramp after himself. Once locked, no one was getting in without specialist equipment. He made his way to migration control, shivering as the cold wind blasted across the flat surface of the pad. The city itself was positioned between two mountain ranges, sheltering from what he presumed were worse winds in more open areas. Even so, the wind was extremely bitter. The migration control terminal was fairly standard for a colony. Lots of transparent but sturdy materials, giving the terminal an open but secure aesthetic. There were plenty of people around, mostly traders and industrial workers, but there were a few civilians as well. A colony like Tagen didn't attract many people beyond those who worked there and their families and a few remaining traders and haulers that ferried goods back and forth. Still, it was busy for a forgotten colony on the edge of Empire space. Skenn joined the immigration queue and waited for his turn. As he waited, he surveyed the area, noting where the militia were stationed and keeping an eye out for other potential threats. He made efforts to observe more mundane things as well, to make it look more like natural curiosity rather than a careful analysis. Once he got to the head of the queue, he handed his identification card. The official studied it briefly and then looked towards him. "Welcome to Targon, Mr. Palmer. May I inquire as to the reason for your visit?" "Looking to sell a genetic printer and the biomass to generate livestock. Had a buyer on Kemri who decided to renegotiate at the last minute. Didn't agree to what he was offering, so looking to sell it to someone here." "And how long do you intend to be here for?" "Probably around 3 to 5 days. If I haven't found a buyer by then, I'll move on to the next potential colony." "Seems like a reasonable request. We just need to register a few biometrics about you first. Could you please look into the scanner there?" Skenn obliged, allowing the retinal scan. "And could you breathe into there, please?" Skenn stooped slightly to breathe into a circular bowl in which a sensor on a stalk picked up all of the unique bacterial fauna. As soon as it was done scanning, it retracted for a quick wash cycle before readying itself for the next person. He didn't like registering his biometrics, as it would eventually raise a red flag back on Caliban. But he had to do it. To refuse the biometrics would place him in an awkward situation. Still, it would probably be a few hours before his presence was detected. "Thank you, Mr. Palmer. You are cleared for 5 days. If you wish to extend your stay at all, you'll need to report back here and register the extension." "Okay," Skenn acknowledged. "If you have any firearms, you will need to take them for the duration of your stay. All standard Teel Corporation laws apply here on Targon. Do please ensure that you stay within the limits of what is legally permissible. If you are unsure as to any of the laws, there is an update you can download to your media pad that will give you all the details," the official explained. "Now if you can move on to the scanner, please." Skenn moved on to the next stage of immigration. The full-body scanner was intended to detect any illicit materials or weapons, and was attended by 2 militia. "Do you have any firearms on your person, sir?" He didn't like the way the militia always used the word sir, as a means to demean those they spoke to. It was meant to put you in your place, to assert their authority over you. Despite his loathing for this form of authority, he had to suppress it. "Yes, I have again 4,500. "That is permissible," the militia conceded. "Could you hand over your firearm, please, sir?" Skenn handed over his gun, and the other militia pulled out a specialist tool which he used to attach an electronic tag to the rear of the handle. "Could you please walk through the scanner, sir?" He obliged, passing through the scanner without a single warning. Skenn did have a number of cybernetic implants, but these did have their own bafflers. They were easier to electronically hide as they were inside his body and not so easily found. Even the interface at the back of his neck was a standard fitting, consistent with the visual implant. As cybernetic implants were commonplace, they were much easier to disguise. To the untrained eye, one implant looked like another anyway, so it didn't require much subterfuge. No alerts were sounded, and the militia waved him through, handing him his now tagged gun. "Enjoy your stay, sir," the militia announced, with practiced delivery and zero sincerity. Skenn felt relieved. Immigration control was the first hurdle cleared. but there were others to come.